Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to HomeGames. It's lovely to have all of you back. It's nice to be back in the seat this week after Steve's session with Clemence last week, which was a stormer, actually. If you haven't, if you didn't make that one, you should go and listen to it. It was a really, really good one. I'm joined today on whichever side of the screen it is when you're looking at it by Martin Jennings of Parmenion. Good afternoon, Martin. How are you?
Afternoon, Mark. Very good indeed. Very good indeed.
Excellent. We're looking forward to our chat today. Not much in the way of housekeeping and all that kind of stuff. I don't have anything to punt you today or any of that kind of thing. So all I will do is in time-honoured fashion, if any of you haven't been on before, then you get a little link in the chat there. If you click that, it will sort any problems you're having out in your feed usually. It doesn't help with me talking nonsense. Nothing really has been able to fix that we found so far. But I feel sure that I'll be doing much less talking today, and Martin will be talking in a very full and frank way that has been approved corporately, as we were just talking about. So that's all going to be good fun. The chat's open. I will say the same as I say whenever we have a chief executive, somebody on, particularly somebody that's in an interesting corporate situation as in the way that Parmenion is at the moment. There's going to be things that Martin can and can't say, everybody. So you can ask him things in the chat and I will put those forward to him, but I might edit just a little bit. So Martin, who's buying Parmenion, for example, is the sort of question that you can ask. And Martin will have a very carefully prepared.
If you know, it'd be nice to know.
That's not on Martin's list of approved answers for that.
You'll appreciate I can't give any details today about the sale process.
Indeed. So we can't do that. There was I did have a thing, well, maybe it might even be over by today and we could talk about it, but it's not. And so there's only so much that we can talk about, but we will get into what we can do as we go through it. So as ever, please ask your questions in the chat. I'll keep an eye on there, or there's the ask a question button at the bottom. And if you do that, that flips a little thing up on my screen and I will know to get into it. So let's start off. Martin, let's find out. You were just saying that you've been ridiculously active during lockdown and you're a fine figure of man. I was saying, actually, before he says anything, lean forward again like you did before. Do it again. How much like Ewan McGregor in Trainspotting does Martin Jennings look? That's ridiculous.
I said Ewan McGregor in Trainspotting was about 50 kilos lighter than I am at the moment. So, however, that did lead on to me doing a bit of running in lockdown. I'm trying to come out of lockdown fitter than I went into lockdown. How about that? So I've always got to have something to obsess about, and can't go and play golf at the moment. So I'm stuck here going running in the morning, trying to kind of get up in the. It's nice actually. This morning's actually quite light now, but through December and January, it's been sort of dark and wet at 6 o'clock in the morning, running around Bristol Downs.
Nice. Not really. It's impressive. I've obviously been doing the same sort of thing.
Each their own.
Yeah, we all have our.
It saves having to do the 5 miles back and forward between the recycling bin, doesn't it? Which is the usual thing of kind of, does it look embarrassing this week how many glass bottles I've got in my recycling bin? It's kind of that kind of question, isn't it? Through lockdown.
I don't know about your end, but back in lockdown 1, they stopped all the recycling kind of schemes. Laurie would come once every 2 weeks and get your bottles and stuff. And honestly, we had kind of compost bags full of the bloody things because the weather was nice and there was a lot of outsidey stuff going on. So it was deeply, deeply embarrassing. Okay, listen, we better do something to do with work, eh? So we know that there's, you can't let anything out the bag and nobody knows anything yet anyway, but tell us a little bit about what's going on, because I think if we get that stuff out the way, then we can get into more interesting things.
Yeah, look, I mean ultimately I think everybody knows that the Standard Life Aberdeen have put the business up for sale, and they're looking for potential bidders at the moment. That process is going through, and as I say, there's not really much I can say about that, but kind of I think it's interesting because the more you think about it, clearly, in all of these processes, what happens is people come and ask you lots of questions, and you have to say lots of things about the business, and ultimately, you're saying lots of good things. But the further into the process you get, the the deeper you go and sort of the layers of the onion become exposed. And I actually was reflecting on the question you asked me the other day, and sort of actually the process has been quite interesting because it allows you to kind of question everything, revisit everything. Revisiting all of your kind of decisions of the past isn't something that I would say I enjoy, but at the same time, you know, you start to kind of re-question everything. And to be honest, I think we've done a lot of good, you know, a lot of good things and a lot of things right in the last few years and made a lot of good decisions. Ultimately, you make some ones as well, but as long as you're generally making more good decisions than bad ones, then I think you're kind of moving forward. But ultimately, Mark, I think for us, it's reaffirmed kind of who we are, what we do, what we think we're good at, what we're not trying to be, what we are trying to be. And so the process has actually been quite an interesting process because it kind of, it's reaffirmed that the sort of, you know, in good corporate speak, the strategic direction of the business is sound, and, you know, we're doing all of the right things. You know, we're working with more advisors. Our assets are growing. You know, the average case size is growing. You know, all of the levers that you kind of look at in these types of businesses are, you know, all in a positive. I mean, the business was bought in 2015 by Aberdeen Asset Management. We've gone through the sort of Standard Life Aberdeen merger, and ultimately, you know, I haven't looked at where we are today. We're about 8.5 billion. So, you know, we've gone sort of 4 times the asset, probably a bit more than 4 times the asset in the last 4 or 5 years, which is good, you know, and we continue to get great feedback from surveys such as yours, right? So, you know, we must be doing something right. The question is kind of what next, really, and kind of clearly we've got a plan, and, you know, ultimately can't talk about the bidders and you know, and the sale process, but the process itself actually has been a very interesting exercise, and I think we've got a lot of learning from how you position the business.
So I had a really interesting conversation yesterday with an analyst guy, and he was talking about some of the listed businesses out there and share prices and valuations and all that kind of stuff, and he was really challenging. Not that the valuations are my fault, right? I was like, why are you having a shot at me? But for the platform style businesses, the rationale as to why it's healthy and why people want to own them and why all this activity is going on, presumably is that there's big things happening that make it valuable in the next 10, 15 years, and his contention was he thought that might have been kind of overcooked a little bit. So as you've gone through the process, do you take time for yourselves and the management team to think about, actually, do you know what, the sources of assets that we would need to really kick this market on for Parmenion and for everybody else? Do you have time to get into that side of things?
Sort of, yeah, yes and no. I mean, you know, you go through all the traditional kind of quant processes and all of the kind of standard kind of business planning processes, and that'll get you to a kind of a view of the future. And I think what's quite interesting, and some of the people that have been around in the Parmenion business probably for a bit longer than me will then challenge you to kind of say, well, actually, we did something different. We didn't go with the stats. We tried to do something different back in the day when we started up. So you know, there's a bit of art and a bit of science to it, ultimately. I mean, clearly we're a small player, right? So at this moment in time, there's a big enough market for us to go at. We look at kind of success through, are we growing our market share? Is that both at a gross flow level and a net flow level? So as long as we're going quicker than what we were going before, or quicker than the market, then we're ultimately growing. So, you know, for me, stats give you one view of it. But I come back to a kind of I'm pretty basic about life, Mark, really. And all I say to the guys, and they're probably bored of me saying it, look, we've got 2 jobs to do, really. You know, we've got lots more than 2 jobs to do, but ultimately we've got to build a great product and try and give exceptional service. And if we do those 2 things, we'll get what we get, ultimately. And the market will decide whether or not they like that or not. Now, clearly, you know, I can see Laura's on. We have to go and sell stuff, and we have to go and talk to people about that. And I think if you look at the different journeys of kind of the business, I joined, say, 2016. We were around about 2 billion of assets. You know, the flows were coming in and were increasing, but they're kind of stagnated around a certain level. And for us, it was about getting out and talking to people more about what we do, because I was surprised when I would, go to some industry events, and you'd sit there and you'd sit next to advisors, and they'd say, so, what do you do? And I'd say, oh, look, I'm new CEO at Parmenion, and they'd say, who are they? And it kind of brings it home, right? Because in our little world, we're very important, and what we do is brilliant, and everything's great, kind of thing. But if nobody knows about it, then it can be the best kept secret alive. So for us, it's really about building that brand footprint, building that kind of presence. We're working with double the amount of advisors that we were working with back in 2016. And for us, it's about making sure that, once we get people kind of into what we do and and if they like what we do, we generally find a very high level of support and advocacy once they've touched the service. Because as I say, we are working on outsourced CIP. We're slightly different in that we're a DFM trying to work with advisors to help provide more rigor and robustness around that investment proposition. And then our platform, because, are we a platform, are we a DFM, are we a tech business? Well, I'll be all of them, depending on what you want, really, at that point. Our platform is configured to deliver our investment proposition. And so we're not trying to compete with all the platforms. Yes, we won the coveted platform of the year the year or so ago, but ultimately simplicity is what we're trying to do. So, we're kind of in that world where we're trying to give a great product, an exceptional service, and we'll configure our technology and we'll build our operating model and our processes really around those two key mantras. So, we're not trying to have to go and kind of outcompete the platforms. We don't have to spend gazillion millions a year building features and functions that nobody really ever wants. We kind of listen to the customers that we're working with. They give us ideas. We try and do as much co-creation as we can as possible, because we're lucky and unfortunate that we've got in-house development, so we can kind of manage the development process and we can work with customers on what those solutions look like. So hopefully every time we deliver something, it's at least of benefit to somebody, the person that we co-created with generally, because they've had an input into the design process. But ultimately, we've got quite a unique kind of model in that sense. So back to your first question, which is, the market. Look, the market's big enough for us. Our market share is growing, both on a gross and a net level. You've got those numbers. Our assets are growing rapidly. And, we just need to continue that trend, really.
So a couple of questions coming in, and I'll put them to you, and you answer them in ways that you can. So from Oliver, thanks, Oliver. Says, how concerned are you? And exact words there, but are you concerned that the potential buyer will share the values that you've talked about? And I guess the great product and exceptional service, as you I've said a couple of times, but there's something about I don't know, I think the reason that firms that give reviews and stuff of Parmenion in our stuff like it, and people do like it, right? You get really good scores and all that good stuff. I think is because it's simple and because it doesn't try to be everything to all people. But I can imagine that purchasers might feel, well, we could extend that out a little bit. And so do you fear compromises in the future, I guess?
Yeah, well, I suppose yes and no. So look, let's think about who's likely to buy us ultimately, right? So why would you buy Parmenion? I mean, there's probably a couple of reasons that you would buy the business. One, that you think that we do something really, really well, and that's a component that you might want to take, or capability, let's say, that you might want to bring into your business. But ultimately, our USP is really, we call it hiding the joins, right? We provide the investment solution, we provide the technology, and we provide the investment operations effectively. And so, we hide those joins, and that's how we give a good service, right? So do you want to buy something and then split that up? And the answer would be no, because the asset won't really be worth what you paid for it as soon as you kind of remove the core USP. So ultimately that leads you to a conclusion. The question for Oliver here is that it leads you to a conclusion that most people that will be successful, or anyone that's successful, has kind of bought into that vision. They bought into the USPs. They bought into the mantra around great product, exceptional service. They've brought into the way we do things. They've generally brought into the management as well, because, you know, ultimately, you know, these businesses are run by human capital at the end of the day. And, that is a very key part to this. And so why buy something, spend a lot of money on it, spend a lot of money going through the process of buying something and then kind of tear it up, rip it up, change it, move it around? You generally will have the question of, okay, in the world of constraints, what constraints have you had in the last few years that we could remove that would allow you to go quicker? And I think that's more of an interesting question. So there'll be a kind of day one, deliver your plan. Two, we bought into what you do. Right, is there anything that we can do from a sort of constraint theory type exercise that if we remove that constraint would allow you to go at a quicker rate than you currently go at? Because, as I say, sometimes it's very hard to explain what we do. We're kind of quite unique, but ultimately we're very clear on what that is. Some people call simple, some people call it narrow. I just think we're very clear on what we do. We have a strong philosophy around the investment options. We know why people use us, and it's generally because we do give that good service. But why is that important? What we're trying to do is working with our customers allows us to do two things. One, can we help provide an ability to de-risk the business, either through kind of consolidation and aggregation of that investment offer or some of the tools? And second, can we do that cheaper, i.e., by giving good service? And look, we've got some good stats, right? So if you look at our stats, we will answer the phones generally to people within, we measure 20 seconds, but say within 30 seconds, we're answering 95% of phone calls. Yeah, I think that's pretty exceptional in the kind of modern world. We've done that all the way through the COVID year as well. But the more important stat is we generally answer 95% of those queries there and then on the phone at that point in time. Now, you can contact us. Other methods are available. You can email us. You can come through live chat. You can do anything else. But ultimately, you can get hold of us and we'll generally solve your question at that point in time. And if we start to broaden out from what we do and we try and compete with everybody else, can we still deliver that same level of service in that different world? And that's the question, because obviously we believe that we can scale what we do. We believe there's a market for it, and we believe we can scale and continue to deliver. But once you start to broaden out the proposition, it starts to change a number of things. Do you have to look at your operating model differently? Do you have to, think about it? And a good example of that would be, we currently don't put the Parmenion investment solutions onto any other platforms. If you want to buy them, you've got to use our tech to do that. Now, a simple answer is, if we were to put them on platform X, it doesn't matter what platform X is. For those of us, the technicians will know that there will be systems and processes and share classes and all kinds of things that will mean that those two aren't quite in sync. Now, if a customer phones us up and says, look, I bought your Parmenion investment solution through you, but I also bought some on platform X. Could you just explain to me why something's gone wrong? And the answer is we wouldn't know, because we don't have all the systems, processes, infrastructure capability of platform X. And so whilst it might look on the face of it to be, a nice revenue line, we could get more flows into our investment solutions. We could take a couple of basis points through that. Actually, it changes our proposition, our offer quite considerably, and also means that we can't deliver the two kind of foundational axioms that we've built on, which is, great product and exceptional service, because I would now have an uncontrollable in the estate. And for us, managing those levers and having the ability to hide the joins across all of that area works for us, and so whilst it works for us, we might as well continue to to go with it. And that's just a very small example, really.
So George here in the chat, as George is never shy about getting up in people's grill a little bit, and I'll paraphrase you, George, a little bit, which is to say it's okay to stay narrow, or focused, or clear, or whatever words you want to use for it. But are you not in danger of getting competed away by huge shops with huge teams and huge footprints and all that kind of stuff? So that classic kind of muscled out dynamic, muscled away on fees or whatever it might be. So do you see a vulnerability sticking with that kind of strategy, do you think?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I would disagree with George's comments around sluggish growth.
Yeah, that's why I paraphrase.
I mean, I can read the questions as well. So I mean,
yes, I know.
I'd love to go out there and look at the you know, and having gone through a sale process, I can look at all of the CAGR asset, you know, of everyone's assets over the last few years, and you can do the analysis as well. I think we're holding our own pretty much in terms of asset growth, and then the answer will that, well, it's easy from a small place. So I'm not sure sluggish. But I, you know, do I actually think that you have to be big to survive? I think the answer to that would be no. I don't think it's all about scale, because ultimately, if you look at the scale players at the moment, they could price everybody out of the market, and in a number of places they're trying to. You know, if you look at the deals that are being done, or the deals that we get told are being done when we're in a competitive situation, every day of the week, if price was the play, we wouldn't be getting any assets. Yeah. So QED, it can't be the right answer, because if you're happy to sit on the phone and wait for, you know, an hour or two for someone to answer the question, or if you're happy to email in and wait for 2 weeks for somebody to get back to you on a simple kind of query, then good luck. And if George is doing that, I'm you know, good luck to him, kind of thing, because I don't know how you can end up giving a great client proposition at the end of the day. I also think when you start looking at the amounts of money that's reported by people like yourselves and Citywire and all the money marketers are kind of telling us how much money people are spending on platforms at the moment, the only person that's paying for that ultimately is the customer. You know, because that's the only place that money's coming from at the end of the day that's kind of funding this kind of tree. So for me, that can't be a good client outcome. If we're delivering poor service, we're spending gazillions on updating software systems and different bits and pieces and moving assets from A to B. So I think there is a place for us in a value play, right? You know, it's always a good example. I always use the one, and I don't know, because I don't really look so much at the D2C market, but ultimately, you know, Hargreaves are sitting there at 45, and you've got some of the, you know, there's cheaper places to go, but they still seem to keep signing up customers. So why is that? You know, why do I go and spend £1,000 on an iPhone? Do you know what I mean? It's kind of that classic kind of question that sits there. There is something about brand, and there's something about experience, and there's something about service. So for me, I think the scale is one part of it. If you could get scale and deliver exceptional service, then you would clear up. But I don't see anybody really doing that at the moment. However, I do think that as we grow, we get more challenges from our customers around, you know, how they'd like us to just broaden out a little bit. You know, they could use it, they want to use us more, and they'd like to use us more for other lines of business, because generally we're chosen for a particular segment within an advisor's, you know, customer base. We don't get everything, you know, we're kind of there for a certain segment. And so I think we do need to listen to those things. And I think we will broaden out. As I say, when you're in the world of constraint theory, you take away the constraints, and what can you do? That's the way that we will look at this post knowing who's kind of going to acquire us and see which direction. So to George's question, that's the long answer. The quick answer is sluggish growth assets. I don't believe that. Do I think that it's all a price play? No. Will we need to broaden out to be a kind of greater appeal? Yes, but we'll do that mindful of the operating model and the service. So
that's a good answer to a challenging question. Thank you, George, as ever. Matthew, hi Matthew, who's a Parmenion user, which is he's a bit less challenging, but he is a bit worried about investment performance. Now, I don't think we need to go into which portfolio has done what. There is something really interesting about the more integrated you are, though, the more everything has to work all the time. On the one hand, you think, well, actually, it's stickier. Firms are less likely to sack us off because they've bought into the hide the joins kind of thing. I haven't heard you use that phrase before, which I kind of like. But everything's got to be on point. So is there a vulnerability in that?
Yeah, look, I think that's. I think it's a fair point, and I think for us, you know, I think probably want to get Peter Dalglish on to talk about the investment. I'm not the qualified person, so that's a nice side step to the question, you know. But Peter would be good to kind of talk through the investment. But what I you know, I come back to, we've got to deliver a great product and exceptional service. And I think as part of that great product, the product has to pass the Ronseal test, right? We're not sitting there at the moment, and thank you, Matthew, for the kind words. Ultimately, we're not saying that we're there trying to shoot the lights out on everything, but we have to be mindful that the product has to perform. And so where there are questions to answer, then I think we do need to answer those questions, and we do need to explain kind of where we are and what we're doing. And I think a lot of the questions that we got through the webinars in the summer or through the back end of Q2 and Q3, and Peter was holding those every other week kind of thing, I think is for me quite important. But don't want to sidestep the question, but yes, they all have to work. The question, I suppose, the question back, Mark, is hide the joins piece. Yes, do they all have to work? Do they all have to work optimally? I don't know. So the question is, I don't think we can be the best performing, the best platform, the best at service, the best at tech development, the best at this. I think it's a bundle and a package of all of those for me. That does it do what it's there to do? Does it pass the Ronseal test, for want of a better word? Ultimately, we're about a risk profiled investment solution, and as long as the risk adjusted returns are all in line, then you can always take more risk but accept more volatility, etc., etc., etc. For me, more of a worry would be if all of a sudden our kind of risk adjusted returns kind of started going all over the place and we couldn't explain that, then there would be something wrong with the methodology. But to Matthew's point, we do need to keep an eye on the overall performance. I don't think we need to be better than best, but I think we do need to keep an eye.
Cool. So one of the things we were talking about yesterday, which we didn't have enough time to chat about, so let's do a bit of it now. You and I both had we were other sides of the aisle back when I was in RAP, and I think you were LVT, weren't you? Yeah. And I used to get really, really pissed off because you would spot all the things we hadn't built and then build those. And it was all good fun.
Yeah.
But back in those days, right, there was a kind of land grab going on, not just for advisors' kind of hearts and minds and all that sort of thing, but also about what would be the center of gravity inside advisor businesses in terms of the stuff that they use, right? And the way I've described it is the battle for the advisor desktop, and it's either going to be the CRM back office system or it's going to be the platform. And that's where, as a business owner, let's say, that's where you're going to get your business information, your business intelligence, and you're going to work there most of the time. But yesterday, we sort of agreed, I think, that in that first wave, the CRMs kind of won it. And platforms kind of said, oh, okay, well, we better send in some data then. And we've got to where we've got to, which isn't perfect by any means. But you were starting to say, well, actually, things might come around a little bit of a different way. And I know you've built stuff on Parm, but the kind of philosophy of it, I think, is interesting. So tell us a bit about that.
Look, I think, so it was also my view on this. I mean, look, data is critical nowadays. Everything's electronic. I mean, we also have this thing about the world going electronic, but let's assume everything's electronic. Data is kind of critical. And back in those days, we're talking about early 2000s, that, how was the world going to play out? Were the platforms just an execution agent? They were, or were they trying to kind of take over the advisor desktop? And nobody's really going to take over the advisor desktop. If you go into an advisor's business today, they'll have an IntelliFlow or an Iris system. They might be using Voyant, they might be using some other tool, a risk profiler, there's this. And actually the inefficiencies are that they don't talk together. And there's still a bit of a standoff there between my data, my system, I'll share a bit with you if I have to. And if you're a customer, you just want it all to work together. You want it to kind of come together quite simply. So for me, that's one of the biggest challenges that we've got to face into in the next few years, how we think about data management and how we go about ensuring that we add value through the bits that we add value through, and not try and protect our value by stopping somebody else having access to something. And for me, that's the challenge. I think, people I talk to have kind of a different view. I want my clients in one place and then I want their products in another place. And I think if I keep segregation, then I've got optionality in the future. But ultimately, I get commercial benefit if they're all working nicely together, because ultimately, I've got to do that process 3 times to get to an outcome. And ultimately, that inefficiency through the system is ultimately being paid for by the client. So you get into this interesting world, don't you, where, you know, what you want and what you say, because, you know, what you want is it all to be seamless and kind of work together in a very interesting, and that could be provided, but that's called, you know, vertical integration. Like True Potential, probably doing very well in that sort of space. You know, ultimately got a platform, got a product, and kind of make it work. But for those that kind of independent businesses, they still want the ability to use different software tools and different systems, but they want the data to work. And I think as an industry, we're quite backward in that. I mean, if you look at what we've done recently, we think, you know, clearly we think it's great, but ultimately all we're doing is we're surfacing up data and providing reporting tools that will allow advisors, you know, to allow them to de-risk their business, maybe manage their pod requirements, manage some of the other bits and pieces. But everyone works in a different way. So for me, the challenge over the next probably, let's say 3 to 5 years, is how do we get to a position where data flows naturally around whatever ecosystems we're using for actual commercial benefit, but we're ultimately comfortable that we're delivering the value in each of our segments. At the moment, it's a bit standoffish, isn't it? You know, could you put all that data in my back office system? Well, I could do, but why would I do that? And why couldn't they just give us all their data? And kind of, I want to be the, you know, the ring that rules them all ultimately. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's going to go a little bit. And for me, I think if we roll this forward, I think that's where our model is quite interesting, because we've got the products, we've got the tax wrappers, we've got the technology, and we can build out that technology, hopefully in a way that will give real tangible benefits to current customers and future customers around efficiency gains and around risk concerns. So if we can de-risk or drive efficiency, then I think that's a good outcome.
So what gets that moving then? Because this is the same discussion as we had 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So what's different this time?
Well, I think ultimately what's different is probably our ability to get hold of that data and move it around. I mean, if you go back to some of the systems that we were talking about, Mark, in 2000, you still had kind of pensions on old mainframes sat in different and platforms. In some cases, were just skinning the front of an old back office product admin system where they sorted out the client interface and evaluation and a new business wizard, but actually all the servicing and stuff where all the transactions are held were kind of ultimately in the back office. That world's changed now, and I think most people have kind of got those repositories of data and actually have got access to it. I mean, even in a company like Parmenion, right, we've only spent the last 2 years pulling out a data warehouse, putting all of the data into that data warehouse, understanding it for ourselves, making sure that the referential integrity, i.e., you know, what does that mean? It means that, you know, have I got a date of birth in that field? Yes. So you look and say, is it got a date in it? And you say, yes, tick. But then you've got to say, well, given they're in retirement, how can they be 18? That's the referential integrity piece. And so making sure we've got clean data, then how we surface it up, I think. Then the second bit to that is then security protocols and how data is kind of moving around. And for me, that's probably more of a concern that we've got to get across. How do we securely move data around in a world where we're still ultimately responsible for the security of that, and also ensuring that that is treated in you know, with all the right rules and regulations that sit on it. So it's all very well pumping data to somewhere. If they are to use that data for the wrong purpose, then I'm ultimately liable. So it's now not a data issue. It's now really a usability and security issue that I think we need to think about. And I did one of these talks at somewhere else recently, and the question for me was, they sort of said, oh, do we need more technology? And the answer is no, we don't need any more technology. We've got enough technology. Financial services doesn't use the technology that it's got. What it needs is cleverer people to work out kind of how to use it and how do we deliver real client benefit. Because again, whose benefit are we ultimately trying to do? If we keep the end customer in mind in all of this, because I said a couple of times now, they're the only people paying for us. So if we put them right at the heart of it, what things could we do that would make their life easier, or those that service their products and assets easier? But I think security is going to be the interesting one, because we really do need to understand how, you know, the role of the, the DPO, the data, the data protection side of things, and who's a data controller, who's a data processor. because it's all very well to go and build an app. I could get my teenage son to build me an app tomorrow, right? But he doesn't know how the data is used. He doesn't understand it. He doesn't know how it kind of creates benefit. And I think this is why you see lots of innovation that doesn't really go anywhere. And people go, that's great, but it's got no practical use. So I think the world's moved on. I don't have if I had the answer, I'd build it. You know, and maybe the answer is, you know, as simple as kind of trying to do some standards, but we've tried that before and it doesn't really work.
Mm-hmm. And there's somebody's asked the blockchain question as well.
Yeah, I'm like,
decentralize it.
I always think of myself like, so I get a real stock answer on this one. It's like Bitcoin. I don't understand it, so I can't do it. You know what I mean? Never things you don't understand, right? And I think I understand. I think I understand blockchain. I think blockchain, you know, and look, there'll be cleverer people than me around blockchain, and I think there has huge advantages to it. And that federated ledger with everybody making that transaction, and I really, in an institutional world, I get it because the networks are small. Once you get into a retail world, if you think about the interconnected parties and everybody authenticating that particular packet at that point in time, what happens when something goes wrong? You've got client money rules that sit there that say we have to provision when a transaction done that doesn't go through, and we have to resource accordingly. What happens if someone in the chain doesn't push the button that day, or the computer falls over or something? You know what I mean? How does the world work? Because the volume of transactions. Now, someone's going to come up who understands blockchain and say, no, you're talking nonsense, Martin. You really don't really get it. But ultimately, I think the amount of transactions. So I get it in institutional. I'm struggling on the retail side, but maybe it's just me.
Fair enough. And on technology, I don't know if everyone knows, you've got a bit of an interesting background. So, you know, we said you were with Elevate back in the day, but you've sat both sides of the fence, right? So we're coming towards the end of our time, but so I want to talk a little bit about how you got to where you got to, because you've come through some interesting jobs, and particularly your time in a technology provider. So you were you're one of the chief. Yeah. In charge of the kettle kind of guys at FNZ. Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about how your career's kind of gone through. But I think I would like to know, I'm sure others would as well, what's it like the other side?
Good fun. You know, I had I mean, for those that don't, I sort of joined financial services late, just at the sort of the turn of the millennium, around 2000. Joined AXA, and really nothing to do with the platform side of things at that point in time, and joined as they wanted to understand customers and data better, because I came from a data background, as a mathematician by trade, and then doing data and predictive modeling and all that kind of stuff for different companies, and joined AXA to understand their customers. That didn't really kind of kick off as well as I kind of thought it had. And I must have just said the wrong thing at the wrong time in the wrong meeting. I can see Paul
refuse to believe that.
I refuse to believe that. I can see Paul McMahon's on here, so we kind of one of I'd have probably just said something like, "You're all talking tosh" or something, and someone would have said, "Well, what do you think?" And I probably said something, and it would have probably a quarter of it would have made sense, and the other 3/4 would have been gibberish. But yeah, we went through that journey of building out the Elevate platform, which was great at the time. And then, my time was done, and I joined FNZ really, and just jumped to the other side of the world. So my first job in FNZ was based out of Sydney. I left AXA and flew to Sydney 3 months later, and sort of arrived. And ultimately, so what's it like? Well, it was kind of weird because I was in a new company. I was now on the supplier side, which I hadn't done before, so kind of big outsourcing contracts. I was in a new country that I didn't really understand. I was, sort of hauled up in some service department somewhere. The family came out 3 months later. The customers all looked the same. They're all kind of, looked the same, spoke the same language, which you would have assumed was kind of made life easier, but all the products were different, the systems were different, the terminology. It took me about 2 years to work out that unit registry meant TA, things like that kind of just go through. So it was an exceptional learning experience, really, and for someone like me to kind of spend time just questioning and learning and trying to understand what was happening. I had an office in Sydney where I was based because that was where the growth was going to come in the region. But the operations and the IT teams were in Wellington in New Zealand. And so when we're over here, we go Australia, New Zealand, that's kind of down there, isn't it, somewhere? But there's a 4-hour flight between the two. And I was doing it weekly, back and forth across the Tasman. And when you get to New Zealand, completely different cultural alignment. So you want to know what's like in FNZ? It was kind of, for me, it's packaged up with learning new cultures, learning new countries, learning new terminology, learning new systems, and ultimately then trying to understand kind of what it was that people were buying into with FNZ. And in a sense, it's quite a straightforward sale, right? We'll do all the back office stuff so that you can deploy the capital that you've got at the front end differentiation for your customers, right? But these projects are always big, nasty, big projects. And, you have to remember that you're working with banks and, big financial institutions, and they have their own, it's easy to kick the supplier all the time, but ultimately, you have to look sometimes at your own shop and some of the challenges that we had to face. So for me, I suppose, coming from the AXA world, looking out, God, bloody suppliers can't deliver what we want. Going to the other side, you were then, once you'd learned all the cultural pieces, we're then going, this is the most ridiculous question you're asking me, because what we seem to be is that the guys at the top were very clear around the strategic direction of the business, very clear about why they were outsourcing. But what happens when you come in as a supplier in that particular environment is then you're then dealing with all of the middle management whose jobs you're kind of changing and replacing, because you spent the last 10 years kind of building a career, generally by knowing something rather than adding value somewhere. Do you know what I mean? Knowledge is power at that particular point. And you're coming in, and actually the role of the outsourced supplier is as much a change agent for the organization as it is the actual proposition that you're delivering at the end of the day, because you're having to come in and have battles with all the people that the senior executives don't want to have battles with. So they've used you as that blunt tool to come in and affect change in their organization, because they know that they can offload X risk, they can outsource Y, they can reduce unit cost, blah. But actually, getting change through a large blue chip organization is sometimes hard. So it's actually, when you look back on it, it's easier to get somebody else to do it for you.
Seems fair.
and I think, for me, I had a great time. Learned a lot. I think I was there for 5 years, and I always say this to anybody that asks. I learned probably more in those 5 years than I'd learned in the previous 20 years of working, in a sense. I mean, you kind of at the coalface. You kind of when you're in a larger company, you are protected a little bit by the kind of by the environment and the governance that sits around. In that kind of world, particularly, you're exposed to everything, and it's a great environment by which to learn and a great environment by which to flourish. And I definitely came out of that significantly stronger than kind of I went in, both at a capability and kind of, I think, as a kind of manager and kind of leader of kind of businesses. And I joined Parmenion, obviously, which was much smaller. After the acquisition by Aberdeen, I got introduced to Martin Gilbert, and he offered me the job. So that was good. And it was really then, can I take all of those learnings and apply them here, in a sense? And I think in the main, we've done some pretty good stuff. I look back and I suspect we've made some mistakes, but can we kind of bring those key kind of learnings and bear them? And the first question I had was, oh, well, you're, poacher turned gamekeeper. You've obviously joined Parmenion to outsource it. And the answer is, that's the most ridiculous thing that you've ever kind of said, really, the person that was questioning me. Because
it wasn't me.
It wasn't you. No, it wasn't you. But every environment's different, right? If you're from the position that Parmenion was in at that point, it made no sense, controlling the levers, owning the joins, being on our own agenda moving forward, I think was really important for that particular business. Even if it costed more, it would be more valuable to be on our own agenda and our own terms. And so, yeah, look, an interesting kind of an interesting journey and so many different learnings that we haven't got time to go through now. But yeah, that was my potted history for the last few years.
Brilliant, and I can see that everyone's selling to each other in the chat as well, which is
I haven't actually read them, yeah.
There's quite a lot of chat about Advisors Club. We're pretty much at time, right? So we don't have time to get into it, but just get a kind of 30-second view on one of the big shifts, which is firms kind of taking a more commanding position and trying to force businesses like yours to reshape themselves around that particular firm on that day. It's being talked about as advisors platform in the chat, but the intent is the same, that the advisor asks the industry to reshape rather than reshapes themselves to fit in with what all the providers' capabilities are. That places quite big demands on firms. Do you think is that sustainable? Is that something that's worthwhile?
No, I mean, look, we have to run a profitable business at the end of the day, right? So we need to think about what we do, and that's why we're very considered and conscious about how we evolve and how we develop our proposition and really work with customers, right? And that's why being everything, trying to be all things to all people doesn't really work for me, because ultimately you can never be the best in everything. So the question I've got is, how do those two come together? Advisors becoming platform operators, for me, if you're big enough and you think that you've got the skills and the capabilities and you really want to get into holding all of that capital and really understanding about client money and client assets and working with technology, then great. But most of that, I think, sometimes comes at it from two angles. The first one is, I'm just fed up with the service I'm getting. So I must, given that I spend so much time resolving these queries myself, I might as well just do the whole thing, because then the only person I can argue with is myself. And I think there's a lot of logic and sense in that. The other one is, I want to get a basis point or two, and I don't really buy that logic, because it comes from a lack of understanding around really what has to be done to be a platform operator and the rules and regulations that come around it. Because if that was the case, then all the platforms would be making astronomical amounts of money, and they're not generally. So, for me, that's not. But so we have to solve that first problem, which is around why people are having, and that's why we focus on service so much. So I can't really talk about others, but that's why we do it, because we don't want people to move away. So you can see the world of vertical integration, and you can see how that works. But for us, we talk to a lot of customers who actually like running their own businesses. They don't want to, sell out to an aggregator or become vertically integrated, and they actually just want the shit in the back office to work, really, and that comes back to the point about data. And I saw give up your data. Look, we're not being data custodians. We're being data custodians. We're not being data guardians. We will share that stuff if there's client benefit for it. So for me, it's how can we create that ecosystem working better that just removes that pain? And everyone's coming at it slightly differently. I also think that culturally, sort of, people who are running administration businesses in a sense, or product businesses, are culturally different than those running distribution businesses and advisors. We all have different wants and needs from our day job. And just because a PowerPoint slide says that works really well together, if we kind of go, it's going to cost X, and we could go here, 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 it really misses the point of what's needed in each of those verticals to make them work from a competency and capability perspective, and kind of then culturally, are they all aligned? And some businesses are making it work, don't get me wrong, but for the majority of us, we need to think through the impact of what that goes. So look, if an advisor wants to become a platform, go and become a platform. Yeah, you could go to SEI, Pershing, you could probably go to FNZ, and you can go and get yourself a platform. Stump up the money, do the project, hold all the capital, pillar 1, pillar 2A, stick it on the, and away you go. And you can have your 15, 20, 25, 30 basis points, whatever they are, particularly for the customer. So, but I'm not sure that's really what they're driving at. Most of the conversations I come to are really a very sensible conversation, which is, I spend so much of my time sorting out problems that I might as well sort them out with myself, because that way then I can move forward. And so let's focus on a particular challenge, because I really don't think the conversation is about a basis point or two. Because as I mentioned earlier, I can't remember who it was that asked the question. Was it Ollie? If you want cheap, you can go and get cheap today. But I actually think we've got to think about value, because ultimately, I think they're very different things. And giving the end client exactly what they want, at a price point that we think is effective, and then deliver the service and the services to enable that without kind of ongoing revolution of just investment capital over the things that we should have done right the first time, is not a good outcome. So, you know, there's horses for courses. I mean, it's the beauty of this industry that we work in, Mark, isn't it? That it's so diverse and there's so many different views. And for me, that's why, for every person that tells me that why it's great for them to join a consolidating firm, someone tells me why it's great for them to be leaving, and another one that tells me why, Parmenion is great. Someone will also tell me why Parmenion is useless. You know, and it's that diversity that sits in our industry that actually makes it, you know, quite interesting and makes it a challenge to come into work each day. I think for us to sort of finalize that one is really just, that's why we focus on what we do. We try not to focus too much on what everybody else does. And because we're not trying to be all things to all people, we can do that. We can just focus on what we do because we're in control of all of the levers: technology, operations, product. Again, we can work with customers and try and design the most optimal. It will never be the best and it won't meet everybody's requirements, but we'll try and be the best at everything we can do each time. And I say, you know, try and deliver great products and exceptional service, and we'll get what we get.
Fair play. Very last question then. Just how badly will you be getting stuffed by Wales at the weekend, do you think?
You said you weren't going to ask about rugby, and let's be honest. Right? Wales have got lucky in the last two games, right?
Is that right?
They can beat 14 men, so, right? So you know, hopefully, if we stay at 15, we should be more than a match. He says, I don't know what to say. I mean, let's just say for me, the England team are a bit poor at the moment. If we went back 6 to 9 months ago, I thought we were on the upward trend. I actually had a bit of faith that we'd got a settled team. We started to look like we knew what we were doing, and we actually you could watch a game, and for me, start to see what we were trying to do. And for some reason, we just seem to have reverted to kick it up in the air and chase. It's like watching schoolboy rugby all of a sudden. Do you know what I mean? All the wind's blowing, kick it up and chase. Look, strangely, they've got big blokes too who can run it back at us. And I think we were lucky to win the last tournament. We're lucky in the autumn. I think, you know, France looked like the quality outfit at the moment in the Six Nations, if I'm being honest. I thought Scotland looked really good. I mean, how they lost that last game, I will kind of thing, which is a surprise because I would have said before the tournament they would be more towards the end. But England, what I don't like, winning and losing is kind of all it is in sport. But ultimately, for me, I'm lost on what they're trying to achieve, Mark. It doesn't make any sense. But I suppose if you pick, you know, a team and you pick the majority from Saracens who don't actually play at the moment, and you've got 5 of your kind of world-class players, and they are when they're on their game, you know, who haven't really had any game time or pre-season, and now I'm going to talk for 20 minutes about rugby, and that's not what I wanted to do.
No, we shouldn't do that.
I think we should beat Wales at the weekend. I think, you know,
fair enough.
Easy 10, 15 points.
I think you've now not only got a contract in your life from big consultancies, so KPMG's PowerPoint department will be getting at you about consolidation. Now we've got a sizable and very aggressive Welsh contingent on these calls. Who will now be gunning for you as well. And Kev, I think we might just turn it into Sky Sports, to be very honest. I think that's probably about as good as anything. Listen, we should end. We've gone way over our time. Thank you so much, Martin. It's always a pleasure to chat. Always very forthright. And thanks to everybody on the call. We had tons of you on today. We're going to take a break next week because we're going to be up against Rishi Sunak. We probably don't want to do that. We are, however, going to be launching our direct platform guide next week, so we might put a pre-record or something out about that. It'd be quite funny, just to piss you all off about how great direct investment is when you don't have to deal with these horrible advisors. And then the week after that, we've got David Ricketts on, who literally wrote the book on Neil Woodford. So I think that's going to be a laugh as well. Thank you, everybody. Lancaster.